Civil Wars, the 13th episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. And I'm going to go through things chronologically, and it starts off actually quite delightfully. Debra's taking the kids out. Ray is staying at home to do some things, which we quickly learn is having something to drink and eating some chips. But then Marie comes over, and in a panic, he decides to hide in the kitchen cupboard because he hasn't got time to go anywhere else. And he drops something in the cupboard. Marie hears it, opens the door, and Ray says he's playing hide and seek with the kids. So what does Marie do? She goes in the cupboard with him and shuts the door. It's more funny because the kids aren't in the house. And obviously we don't find out how that problem resolved itself, but I found that to be a really fun way to start things off. The main narrative then kicks in with Frank and his friend Harry attacking Ray's house, and it turns out this is part of their Civil War reenactment. They're preparing for an upcoming reenactment, and Ray is initially worried that Frank wants to ask him to join him. Ray really doesn't want to do this, and it turns out that Frank just wants to ask him to take out his recycling since he'll be away for the reenactment. I don't know why Marie can't do it. I'm not sure why Marie can't take out the recycling, but nevertheless, that's all Frank wanted to ask him. And then, a little while later, Debra is discussing the presentation she and Ray have to do for a baby shower. I will be honest, I've never been to a baby shower, but if somebody invited me to a baby shower with the expectation that I had to give a presentation of some sort, I'm not going. I'm not going to your baby shower. Ray obviously doesn't want to go either. And then he finds out that Robert is going to the reenactment. And even though Ray doesn't want to go to that, he goes over to Frank and Marie's house and kind of invites himself, but also Frank kind of invites him. It's a very grey area with whether or not Frank technically asked him, but he is going now. And I think quite delightfully, Frank leaves the room and we find out that Frank didn't ask Robert to go, which I think was really important because had Frank only asked one of his sons, that's going to really hurt. So I found it funny when we found out that Robert had to enlist himself, but also I think it was probably the right way to take things because it's not suggesting any favoritism. And Ray's response when he realised he had just signed up to something just because he thought Frank had asked Robert, I thought was brilliant. But then Ray is actually packing to get ready. He's taking Rice Krispie treats and night lights, and it's very adorable. And he actually realised that he's looking forward to going because he's going to spend some quality time with his father. And then we see them getting ready, and Frank does a demonstration of how to act shot, as if somebody shot him during the reenactment. Great performance from Peter Boyle, of course. And he's really getting into it. And I believe this is the case with a lot of people. Obviously because I'm British, but I've never been to a Civil War reenactment or ever even seen one in real life, of course. But it does seem like something where those who take part really get into it. And I think that that's a really fascinating hobby to have. And Frank's performance there was brilliant. We then get an interesting moment that we come back to a little later. And this is where they find a pocket knife with the initials AB. We found out that this is Albert Barone, Frank's father. They went on a lot of trips together, and we kind of gloss over that. And then Ray got his uniform, or he found out what his uniform was going to be, and he found out that he has to fight on the south side. Because the guys on the south are short of a few guys, so to even things out, he's going to be on the other side. And obviously Ray doesn't want this because the real reason he's looking forward to going is to be spending time with Frank, so he's kind of upset by this, and I can completely understand why he would feel this way. This episode is also very educational. Well, it's not. It triggered education for me. This is completely irrelevant to my thoughts on the episode just now, but I actually watched this episode when I was in the States last year for Thanksgiving, and I realised I don't know that much about the Civil War. I have a very basic knowledge. And while I was watching this episode, I was actually Googling it and trying to get a better idea of what was going on. So the episode itself doesn't really provide an education about the Civil War, but it did encourage me to go and do some research of my own. So that's a pretty great thing as well. That's a complete tangent, but credit where it's due. The episode encouraged me to learn some more. We then have Frank and Ray alone. And it's such a simple one-word response, and I absolutely love it. Frank's feet are hurting, and he lifts up his boot, and he asks Ray, what does it say on the bottom of my right boot? And Ray replies, left. Just one word response, but I just found that very, very amusing. And he then confronts Frank and says, I don't want to be on the other side. I want to be on your side. I want to spend time with you the way you spent time with your father. And Frank's confused for a moment, having just forgotten what he said about his own father. And he doesn't admit that he had fabricated the time he spent with his father. Not immediately. He just asks Ray if he's going to help him with his boot. And then when he's sitting down and Ray is crouched down helping him get his boots off to put them on the right feet, he kind of opens up a little bit and admits that he tried to be a better father than his father was to him. And I think that Ray actually had a good point here, that Ray himself tries to be a really good father. He obviously tries to do things with his children that he never got to do with his father, and Ray's hope is that his children will be even better than him as parents with their children, and so on and so on. And I think that is the best way to look at it. If you have gaps in your childhood, if you didn't get to do certain things with a parent or parents that you would have wanted to do, just be that parent. Be the parent you wish you had. And that probably isn't going to be a perfect parent, because I dare say there isn't such a thing. But then your children will identify anything they missed out on, and they will improve on it still. And I think that that's a really positive, healthy way of looking at it. You can't be perfect, but you can improve on things. And I think that that's definitely a really positive outlook. And we then had a moment that made me a little bit emotional, because I think it's so beautiful. And it's Frank reaching out to Ray. We know Frank doesn't really show his emotions that often. And he teaches Ray the Civil War handshake, and they have to clasp each other's forearms. And I don't know if that's genuinely something people do when they do Civil War reenactments. I'd be very keen to find out. But they hold this pose for longer than they needed to. And it was beautiful. It was very, very well done. And I rather enjoyed it. And then we cut to the time of the Civil War reenactment, and Frank, Harry and Robert come over to collect Ray, and Ray comes down the stairs in his uniform. They all have their uniforms on. They look brilliant. I have no idea if they're historically accurate, but they look great. And Ray has a moustache now. He looks brilliant. And just before he's leaving, Debra asks him to sign the baby shower card, and he won't. And she asks him what she's supposed to say, and he looks at her and says, and I quote, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," which is just, of course, brilliant. And then we have the music, and the music's beautiful, and just as Debra shuts the door, the music stops suddenly, and she just utters, "Idiots." And then she goes to the kids, the music starts up again, and then I feel like they went above and beyond with this episode, or with the ending, because we get to see a teeny tiny snippet of the reenactment. We have a couple more characters in costumes, we have a little set, and it's snowy, and they didn't need to do that. They could have ended it with Debra, or anything really, but they went above and beyond to make things a little bit different, and I really appreciate that, and I rather liked it. So I thought that was a pretty powerful ending with some really great music, and it's ultimately a very, very sweet, moving episode with Ray and Frank, with some really great takeaways. And as I said, I actually learned some stuff about the Civil War, again, not because of the episode, or not because of what's in the episode, but because it encouraged me to go and do a little bit more research. So that's a pretty good thing as well. I can't really complain, can I? All things considered, Civil War is a pretty brilliant episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.